when you deal with sensitive government documents, it is absolutely proper to redact when it comes to witnesses, when it comes to victims, when it comes to security guarantees. But you always provide an explanation for the redactions. That's the proper practice. The Trump administration did not do so. They did not provide context for the documents either, which is why you have this complete muddle in terms of what is coming out. And then you do get the speculation going beyond what the documents say, for example, not only about individuals in the United States, but about Andrew Windsor here in the UK.
And we'll start with Epstein. Another 11,000 files have been released. They seem to show that the US president flew on his private jet many more times than previously reported. That does not mean the president acted in a criminal way, of course, and there's no allegation that Donald Trump has committed any crime. But what does Trump's name appearing in these files mean for his image and popularity? Well, Professor of International Politics at the Clinton Institute at University College Dublin, Scott Lucas joins us now. Good morning to you.
Very good morning to you both.
I hope you're very well in that wonderful city of Dublin today. But tell us about these latest kind of revelations. Do they shift anything as far as Donald Trump is concerned?
Oh, I think they do, but I think they actually go beyond Trump, if I can explain very briefly.
Yeah.
Your listeners probably know by now that the headlines will be about Trump having at least 8 flights on Jeffrey Epstein's plane. That on one of those flights, it was just he, Epstein, and a 20-year-old woman. And that on other flights, there were at least 2 possible witnesses into the later case against Jeffrey Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell. So once again, no evidence that Donald Trump was involved in criminal wrongdoing, but that there was a proximity of Trump not only to Epstein, but to those who might be witnesses or victims of Epstein's crimes. The second document, over which the Justice Department is making an unusual intervention to try to push it back, is a claim letter from Jeffrey Epstein to the former doctor for the U.S. national gymnastics team, Larry Nassar, when they were both had been convicted of sexual offenses, in which Epstein says to Nassar, like us, the president likes nubile young women, and then refers to crudely to the infamous Donald Trump claim that he used to grab and accost women, sexual abuse, effectively. But I think the big documents, because they're beyond Trump, is that on Monday night, the Justice Department posted the initial tranche of documents. Then they withdrew them for a few hours before they finally did release. A few news organizations, thank goodness, downloaded the documents. And a set of them are references to memoranda after Epstein's death to co-conspirators. In other words, men who might be involved in Epstein's crime. There is a 7-page document by prosecutors examining whether co-conspirators should be charged. There is an 85-page follow-up in December 2019. There is a 13-page document on whether corporate charges should be brought, and a 26-page document on a specific target, a specific individual who might be charged. Now, of the documents that eventually came out, there are documents that refer to 10 co-conspirators. That's 10 who, in the middle of 2019, had been served with subpoenas because they were under investigation. And I emphasize those documents because they go back to a claim by the Republican Representative Thomas Massie, who was key in getting the legislation for the release of these documents, that he knows the names, or at least the general identities, of 20 men who could have been charged alongside Epstein, and that he wants those individuals effectively to be held accountable.
So we won't speculate as to who they are because we don't know. We won't speculate to what it says about them. Just to stay. But what are you implying is going on that potentially the evidence is there against certain individuals without saying who they are, but nothing has happened? And even the release of all these documents, in some ways, it's a nightmare because some people are being named or photographed, and the association is there, but they don't get their day in court to disprove the allegations, nor indeed for prosecutors to prove them. It's the worst of all world for all concerned, is it not?
Yeah, I mean, as you've heard from other analysts, and we need to be honest here, what you have is a White House attempt to cover this up and to divert by other means in terms of the ways they've handled
Well,
these
they've
documents.
released most of them, have they not? They've released a huge
No,
amount.
no, no, there's a small fraction. I mean, Todd Blanche, who's President Trump's personal lawyer and now Deputy Attorney General at Justice Department, says hundreds of thousands of documents. Now, if that's true, we're talking around about a total of 30,000 that have come out. So you're actually talking about a fairly small minority of documents that have been released. Now, I take the point that, look, the 30-day deadline and the White House was legally bound to get those documents out after 30 days, which expired last Friday. They might not be able to make it because of the sheer volume of documents and because of a need, to make justifiable redactions. The problem is that when they released the first tranche of documents last week, they tried to spin them. Um, Many documents that were important, that were essential against Epstein, including the indictments against him, including the explanations of the indictments. In other words, the summary of the evidence did not come out. There were entire documents that were blocked out, including key grand jury documents from the New York investigation in 2019. And then the White House pointed reporters to celebrity photographs. Look, here's Bill Clinton. Look, here's Bill Gates. Look, here's Michael Jackson. Oh, look, here's Bill Clinton again. And they did it to the point where two Justice Department staff put out misleading, some might say false statements about Clinton being with victims. The worst one was saying he was alongside Michael Jackson with these children, redacting their faces to try to imply that both of them had been involved in inappropriate activity. That attempt to spin and divert is what is catching up with the White House now because it's been chaotic when they've carried out the subsequent releases. And I'll just give you a fundamental, because both of you know this from being journalists. It is, when you deal with sensitive government documents, it is absolutely proper to redact when it comes to witnesses, when it comes to victims, when it comes to security guarantees. But you always provide an explanation for the redactions. That's the proper practice. The Trump administration did not do so. They did not provide context for the documents either, which is why you have this complete muddle in terms of what is coming out. And then you do get the speculation going beyond what the documents say, for example, not only about individuals in the United States, but about Andrew Windsor here in the UK.
So you mentioned Bill Clinton, and you are a professor at the Clinton Institute.
Yeah.
And I know you're academically independent, but there's a certain clue in the name. It's not in his interest either to have this speculation out there from all directions without being able to resolve it. How do we move on here in view of the fact there's probably more to come out, but a lot will be redacted, and crucially, there's no criminal prosecutions envisaged against anyone, which is frustrating for those who want the truth, and it's horrible for the victims who just sit here watching everybody discussing it, but knowing there's no consequences for most people.
Now, at full disclosure, the Clinton Institute, where I work, has no connection with the Clinton family, with the Clinton Foundation. It was named after Bill Clinton by the Irish government as a thank you for the Good Friday Agreement. But that's the extent of any link. In terms of your question, I think you're right to go back to the first priority, which goes beyond Donald Trump, which goes beyond Bill Clinton, which is to get transparency, accountability, and justice for the victims of Jeffrey Epstein and of those who were alongside Epstein in this rape, trafficking, other sexual abuse. Now, to do that, as the representatives of Bill Clinton have said, as the representatives of the victims have said, you get full disclosure of the documents. You do not just simply drip feed them. You get an orderly process for full disclosure. You redact when it is necessary to protect individual security, and you provide context for these documents. But that is not in the interest of the Trump administration because they're trying to protect their quarterback. That's the fundamental here.
The level of detail. Final thought here. Just
Sure.
I'm just noticing that Ghislaine Maxwell was asked or referenced the fact that what she was looking for was intelligent, pretty, and fun girls from good families. In a strange way, for me, that sort of otherwise kind of perfectly sensible sentence is really chilling the sort of cold-blooded nature of all this. And when you add to that the scale of it, this is possibly one of the greatest scandals of all time.
And I think you go back to the fundamental that we just talked about. Look, we can talk about the political consequences, and there will be serious political consequences. We can talk about that in the US, we could talk about it in the UK. But what you're coming back to here is the rape of hundreds of girls, not just young women, they were girls, and that they have had to wait 30 years for any sense of closure. Some of them have died waiting for that closure. You think of Virginia Giuffre, for example. At the end of the day, you need to have a process, which is one of dialogue between Trump's officials with Congress, who have legally asked for the documents, with an independent judicial system, not with the Justice Department, which is effectively Donald Trump's political outpost. And you need to do this on the basis of if you are not going to look at opening new charges against other individuals, you should at least have a process by which the evidence, the confirmed evidence, is out there. I mean, you owe it to these women, some of whom bravely stood outside the Capitol last month to express the pain that they'd gone through, but who bravely said, this is not just for us. This is to make sure that this can never happen again.
Scott Lucas, thank you very much for joining us today from Dublin. Really, really creepy, unnerving, horrible, isn't it, Rosie?
Yeah, we should stress, and we will across the programme, that the emails, the documents, they don't indicate any wrongdoing. But clearly there is a big conversation about the extent to which people's reputations are being damaged because are they guilty by association? And we've had a text in here from Mike who says, all we need is the final list of criminals and crimes. That is desperately what the victims want. And yet the process by which this information is being made public, being sort of in one sense drip fed, but then at the same time being absolutely inundated with, thousands of documents, many of which are heavily redacted, actually getting clarity on the process is proving extremely difficult. And there has, it seems to me, to be a very careful handling from the Department of Justice, from the White House, in terms of which documents are released when, in which order, to try to mitigate the damage to reputation of the people who are implicated in the photographs and the documents.
Yeah, and I just keep thinking the more we are encouraged to look in a certain direction, and it's not sort of to give, for instance, Donald Trump a break, denies anything, Prince Andrew denies anything, but we are constantly encouraged to look at them. And I'm not giving them a free pass, but I just wonder, in those thousands and thousands of documents, when we get a sense of the scale of this horrendous operation, how many people are getting away with it, essentially.
And as Scott just suggested there, many more documents to come. I wonder what will be released between what will be a quieter period between Christmas and New Year. The careful handling and management of stories, I think, does play a role in this as well.